Hello and welcome to tonight's joint budget decision session between the portfolios of children, young people and education, and culture, leisure and communities. I'm Councillor Darrell Smalley, I'm the Exec Member for Culture, Leisure and Education, and joining me is the Councillor Keith Orrell, the Executive. In fact, would you like to introduce yourself, Keith?
Good evening, Councillor Keith Orrell, Executive Member for Children's Services.
Thank you so much, Keith. And just, I know Sarah and Debbie, you've been to lots of meetings today, and everyone's done it slightly differently, I think. So, but I think just so I don't butcher anyone's titles and names, if we could just go around, and I'll just call on you sort of in no particular order at all. Amanda, do you want to go first?
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm the Corporate Director of People Services.
Thanks so much. Sophie? Oh, you're just on mute. We lasted a couple of minutes before saying that, so oh, I don't know if we can unmute you. There we go.
I can come off now. Thanks, Darrell. So I'm Sophie Wales. I'm the Assistant Director for Children's Services.
Thank you so much. Maxine?
Maxine Squire, I'm Assistant Director for Education and Skills.
Thanks so much. Debbie?
I'm Debbie Mitchell. I'm the Chief Finance Officer.
Thank you. Richard?
Hi, I'm Richard Hartle. I'm the Head of Finance for Adults, Children and Education.
Thanks, Richard. And Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Kirby, Principal Accountant in Corporate Finance.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And last but certainly not least, Charlie.
Good evening. I'm Charlie Croft, Assistant Director, Communities and Culture.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you to everyone watching and listening. The first item on the agenda today is declarations of interest. I don't think I have any interest to declare. Does anybody else have any declarations of interest on any of the business? No?
I don't.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. I can see a shaking of heads. Item 2 is the minutes. It's an awful long time ago. I did watch it earlier just to recall my memory, and obviously myself and Ian sat there in West offices feels like decades ago, let alone just last year. I'm looking at the minutes. I'm happy to approve they're an accurate record, and I'm assuming at some point when we're allowed back into West offices, we'll sit there and sign the hundreds of copies that we've got to get through physically. But I'm happy to approve the minutes for an accurate record of the meeting on the 14th of January 2020. Item 3 is public participation. We have had 2 registered speakers in advance of the meeting, and in no particular order. I think we have Councillor Bob Webb first, if that's okay. And I know the rule is 3 minutes, but we only have 2 tonight, so I'm not going to be watching the clock. So so over to you, Bob, if that's okay.
Thank you, Councillor Smalley. Can you hear me?
We can, perfectly.
Good. Thank you very much. So yeah, thank you for allowing me to speak this evening, and I hope that you'll consider the points that I make on the basis of what's best for York's residents, and in particular our young people. I feel that my job in this process at this stage as the opposition spokesperson for children and young people is to challenge the suggested budget that you as the administration have worked with officers to produce and are about to decide upon this evening. Therefore, I simply want to pose some questions that you and the residents of York need to be thinking about during this process. So firstly, the growth figures. I do not disagree at all that children's social care requires additional funding, and I would of course support this. However, there is no detail in this. Essentially, it's a big round figure, which is really good, but there is no detail. Therefore, I ask you, sort of, what real scrutiny have you as executive members put in to get into this point this evening? And would it not be to have some sort of concrete idea of what that money will be spent on or outlined here tonight? Otherwise, there's a strong possibility that given the absolutely tight purse strings that we're working with, we could end up with funding spent on something only to find out there's something else that needed it more. Suddenly there's none left. So as an administration, I think your oversight is absolutely essential here. And so I really just want to stress the fact that the more detail in this would make it possibly easier for me to support this outright, or maybe more difficult. I don't know, but because we don't have the detail, because that's not been put in, I can't honestly comment either way. Sadly now onto the cuts. So In some specifics here, in CYPE 3, there's a proposed cut to the Learning and Work Advisor team of 99,000 in this financial year, and then a further 70,000 in the year after that. And this proposed saving, if you can call it that, is meant to come about through increased income through the development of an expanded trading offer. Therefore, my first question has to be, at this time, who are you going to trade for with it? So at a total of 169,000 being removed from a service that supports young people at risk of not entering education, employment or training upon leaving school. I might remind you that providing support to these young people is a statutory service. So if we're asking schools to lead on that and buy in those services, I think that's going to be quite tough. And that leads me to another question. At a time when the Council's Human Rights Board received a paper outlining that there has been a threefold increase in unemployment in 16 to 24-year-olds, is now the right time to cut that particular service? In CYPE 4, in a review of early help, I mean, this is a service that throughout this period of difficulty and poverty for many has seen an increase in usage. And this is a positive thing in a way, because it means that the more people that use this service and they're accessing this service at the right time, it means that there's less likelihood that people are going to be delaying and holding on and not accessing a service until they absolutely need it, at which point it's a point in crisis and it then becomes far more expensive for us to deal with. So actually, for many, many reasons, we need to think about the sensibility of a cut in this particular service, a service that's doing good work and could do some really, really good stuff. So I just want to think carefully about that particular cut. Also in the same cut, actually, in CYP 4, it's the second half of a cut that was never actually realised throughout this period. Now, obviously, this year has been quite a tricky year, and I can understand why savings that were meant to be made were never made. But if we're in a situation where actually now both of those savings of 150,000 are taken within this one single calendar year, that's £300,000 to a service which is really, really fundamental to our help for children and their families, all in 1 year. So I think that's something to consider. Now, I think finally, I recognise that this is a really difficult year, and I'll happily call for your former partners in the Conservative Party to improve their offer to local authorities. But I have to insist that you think very carefully about what you are doing to services that protect and support the most vulnerable families in our city. I really, really want to work with you on this. I really want to make this work. But at this stage, without the detail in the growth and with a look at some of the cuts that are presented, I think it's going to be really, really difficult. So I'm happy to work with officers and with administration members to investigate this further over time. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Councillor Webb, and thank you for your comments, which I'm sure will be taken into account when we get to the recommendations. I think what we'll do is, if officers might want to say and respond to some of your comments, but we'll probably leave that until we get to the full item, just so we don't expand public participation into an item itself, if that's okay. But I'm sure you'll listen in to the conversations when they happen, and absolutely accepting your offer to work with us and officers to go through the detail. I know decision sessions for budget items are a relatively new thing. We started them last year just to ensure there was increased public accountability. But naturally, it does mean, especially in this sort of year, that it's quite difficult to make sure that all that detail is there. But nonetheless, hopefully it's a bit more accountable and a bit more transparent than what the council had previously. But thank you ever so much for your comments, which again will be taken into account when we get to that agenda item. And I'm sure officers have took notes and will be prepared to answer some of your early concerns. Our next public speaker is Councillor Edward Pearson, and again, Ed, we're not going to be stringent on the 3 minutes rule. So over to you, really, and thank you ever so much for coming.
Thank you, Councillor Smalley. Can you all hear me?
We can.
We can.
Brilliant, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to speak on the budget item tonight to make sure that the continuing excellent work on the city's libraries does not go unrecognised. I'm sure you'll be discussing the extreme financial pressures facing the council during this ongoing global pandemic later on in the meeting. But I, for one, am very grateful to see that the administration's commitment to protecting, innovating and enhancing library services in York has not been impacted by this major crisis. We have now seen how vital the library services have been for our communities throughout the last year. They have been a lifeline for many at this time. Whether it's reading a good book or utilising the many resources that Explore has to offer, it's providing a vital service now more than ever, particularly for isolated residents living on their own during these lockdowns. Up and down the country, we're seeing community and particularly library services cut and closed. And I'm very glad to see that not only are there no such proposals put forward in this budget, but that the major investment in maintaining and creating new libraries is still a core commitment. Last year's budget saw the administration protect every library in York over the next 14 years by securing a total of 32 million for our libraries. I'm glad to see that these proposals continue this investment. I, for one, am particularly looking forward to seeing the groundwork that has already been done continuing to provide a new permanent library for Haxby and Wigginton residents in my ward, which will be a bigger and better facility than the previous local library, with room for new services such as space for hot desking and a reading cafe, making it an accessible and useful modern facility for all ages and lifestyles. The Lib Dems have been clear right from the very beginning of this administration that our libraries play a key role in supporting local communities, and the continuation of this vital investment will secure their future as important focal points for our all-important communities. Many thanks for listening.
Thanks so much, Councillor Pearson. Thank you for registering to speak tonight. And absolutely, having been to the various temporary libraries we've had in Haxby, yeah, completely agree with that commitment to make sure we get a permanent library in Haxby as soon as possible. Thank you, Councillors Webb and Pearson, for registering to speak, and as ever, you're more than welcome to stay and listen in to the rest of the discussion. With that, we move on to item 4, which is the financial strategy 2021 to 22 to 25-26, and this is found on pages 5 to 34. Just before, I think, and again, every budget decision sessions work slightly differently, but I think I'll just give a bit of an introduction and then over to Debbie, if that's okay, and then over to officers to pick up on some of the comments that we've had from public speakers and also questions from Keith and I as well, if there are any. I think, as everyone said, and it's hard to sort of restate it too often, but it is incredibly difficult circumstances we've come to with this budget, and I think as public speakers have commented, it's a mix really of savings that weren't realised due to the COVID-19 crisis, savings that we'd never ever anticipated having to make, again due to the crisis, and also some opportunities that we never thought would be there to either realise savings or do things differently and deliver things in a better way. I think amongst the enormous pressures that the council finds itself in, there are some rays of light, and in particular the 3.5 million COVID recovery fund, which I think will be a lifeline for the city in days that will continue to be quite challenging, going through 2021 and most likely into 2022 as well. I think the efforts to support communities, especially in COVID-19 recovery efforts, through to ensuring that the businesses and individual households are supported are really critical, and a bit like obviously Councillor Pearson mentioned libraries, but a whole host of services are protected within this budget that other councils we'll see are not doing that. I think my hometown is closing drill halls and trying to get rid of swimming pools, and I think that the fact we're not in that position in York is really critical. I think with that, Debbie, are you okay to introduce item 4, and then we'll go over to Amanda and colleagues to go through the budget in detail?
Yeah, so I'll just do a brief introduction, setting out the sort of overarching council-wide context. So as you mentioned, Daryl, these proposals have been prepared in the context of this unprecedented financial challenge and uncertainty due to the pandemic. And that pandemic has seen increased demand for services and support alongside reduced income across all services across the council. The spending review that was announced by government in November towards the end of last year was only for 1 year, and therefore that hasn't added anything and hasn't given us any further certainty on the financial side of things. And the funding that we did receive was all one-off COVID related funding. So the key assumptions set out in the report are that a proposed council tax increase of 1.99% for a general increase, plus a 3% adult social care precept that will be ring fenced to adult social care services. We've identified pressures of just over £12 million, which therefore leaves a budget gap of just under 8 million that's needed to be found from budget savings. The underlying requirement from a financial perspective has been to try and maintain a stable financial position in the midst of all this uncertainty, alongside dealing with challenges facing adult and children's social care in particular. And those challenges are national issues that really require a sustainable funding solution in the long term from central government. So the proposals do, as you mentioned, include the creation of a COVID contingency of 2.5 million in revenue and 1 million in capital to deal with any further pressures that we will see in the beginning of the new financial year, but also to accelerate recovery and support communities. And the proposals also include a total of 2 million in total into social care. As Councillor Webb mentioned in his session earlier in the meeting, that growth is not allocated to new things. That growth is to deal with existing pressure. So in terms of the detail of what that growth will be spent on, I mean, Amanda might want to add to this a bit later, but it's not going to be spent on new things. That is to deal with the existing pressures that are being seen across the directorate. So I'll leave Amanda to pick up on that. The report, the annexes to the report outline the detailed proposals for these portfolios, and we've also included a summary of the consultation responses that have been received to date. As a reminder, the consultation is a live exercise at the moment, and that closes on the 31st of January. So a refreshed and revised version of the consultation will be presented with the executive report, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you ever so much, Debbie, and I know it's been a long day of budget meetings, so thank you for still doing that so well. Over to Amanda, and if you'd like to introduce or bring in any officers, then please do, and then over to Keith in case we've got any questions.
Okay, good evening, everyone. As Debbie points out, this is a really challenging time for people directorates. Clearly, people have been significantly impacted by the pandemic, and we are in a situation where we're seeing very significant rising demand in service areas where demand was already significant. So if you look at the national picture in relation to demand for SEND services, you'll see that that's a growing picture across the country, and we're seeing similar demand for children with additional needs. We in York have seen very significant demand rises as part of our improvement journey in children's social care. We're now starting to see demand in those areas plateauing as practice is getting better, and the point that Councillor Webb made around people getting services at an earlier point. We are seeing high numbers of people that access our early help services. As a consequence of lockdown 1, we didn't see a massive spike in referrals to children's social care, which other local authorities had done, but we did see a big increase in referrals to early help. We're already seeing an increase in referrals to early help this time, which is great because it means people are able to access those services at a better time. What we are having to do, though, in the uncertainty that Debbie outlined, is to think about where we can take some opportunities to work differently and to be different. So the savings that you've got outlined, really try and maximise, given the difficult context, the opportunities that we have as working as now what is a people directorate rather than what was education and children communities. And also thinking about how we can work across different footprints, how we can work with partners differently. So in relation to the the saving that's allocated against the learning and work advisors, that is thinking about a review of that service, which is looking at how we can best support people into education, training and employment across the resources that we have in a people directorate, recognising that statutory responsibility for careers advice sits with schools rather than ourselves, and how can we support the school sector to deliver that more effectively, and is it possible to trade across a bigger footprint that might be able to help us in that area. In the early help model that was raised also by Councillor Webb, that again is around looking at a different approach to delivering those services. I think Sophie and Maxine are both on the call, they might want to comment, but I think we're really quite excited by a move which is much more to a strengths-based approach. It is much more around family group conferencing, which we know has worked really effectively in other local authorities to reduce need, to mean that vulnerable families can get support at a much earlier stage, but can also think about the resources that they have within their family and within their community that can help them meet their own needs. So the realignment of services in that area that's suggested is very much around a different way of working. It's around supporting people earlier, it's around supporting people for a shorter period of time so that they're much more able to not have dependency on our services, but to access services in their communities and build the strength that they need to be able to be resilient without a need to rely on statutory service provision. I don't know if Sophie or Maxine want to say anything on any of those issues.
No. Do raise your hand either virtually or physically. It's up to you. No, fantastic. No.
I think that's me.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. Over Keith, do you have any comments or questions?
Some comments, Daryl. I've been following budgets for 30 years as a councillor, and we've never had one like this before. It's completely different. Every budget you have to save millions of pounds, and normally we have many meetings with council officers looking for savings, looking where new investments needed. We haven't been able to do that this year, and it has been a loss. We have been able to meet virtually and have, I think, probably many more meetings because it's been virtual, but the process has been more difficult because of that. And like you, I want to thank all the officers who've been through that process with us, because it's been very difficult for them and more time consuming, so they've had to put a lot more into it than in previous years. And I think what we've come out with, certainly in our directorate, is something that is good for the future. As Amanda said, we're trying to look at different ways of working and how we can use the resources in a better way to meet problems earlier than we have in the past, and therefore reduce the costs in the future and make better services and better help for families and children as we go along. There is the dedicated schools budget, and we're going to have to look at a recovery plan for that, principally because of the inadequate funding from central government. They've been looking at it for some time, but we haven't got the details of that yet. And we need to get those, the increased offer from government to make that grant service work properly. I'd like to thank Bob for his comments. I think Amanda's has sort of detailed the way we're moving forwards in the relation to the comments that he made in cutting back services for young people and in early years. I think the process that Amanda's described will help us in the future and help us to get better services for young people.
Well, thank you so much, Keith, and just to agree and add really in the communities team. I know when you looked at the priorities this time last year, it's wildly different from what they've spent the year doing, and from helping man the community hubs throughout the darkest days of the pandemic through to actually supporting communities, and in the last couple of weeks getting lots and lots of grit bins out across lots of communities. So a really varied role that, that, again, not many councils can really shout about because often they've gone by the wayside. But hopefully this budget will protect and make sure that in the coming years we have a much stronger service for residents to benefit from. I think with that, unless there's any other, I'm looking for hands, unless there's any other points, comments or questions, I think just a quick reminder that myself and Keith aren't leaders of the council, and we're not formally approving and setting the budget here tonight. We're just giving it a public airing and letting it go on its course to executive and then later budget council. So just a reminder that they are draft proposals and the budget consultation is still ongoing, and we just encourage everyone listening to get involved and make sure they have their say on what will be a critically important budget for the city. With that, the recommendations are at paragraph 16 and on page 9. Myself and Keith will be both happy to approve the recommendations. But I can see a nod, thank you so much. And so with that, we're approving the recommendations on item 4 and sending it on its way to executive for another airing and more scrutiny. And thank you ever so much for all the officers that have helped prepare the item and do all the work behind and all the detail behind it. And thank you for all the work we're about to do in the coming weeks to ensure it's even fuller and ready for full council. I think with that, we've got item 5, which is urgent business. I've not been notified of any urgent business, and I don't think we have any just now. So thank you to our public speakers. Thank you to all the officers here tonight. Thank you to Angie, our fantastic Democratic Services Officer, and thank you to all the webcasting team that are behind making all these meetings happen. Thank you so much, and I hope you all have lovely evenings.
Thank you, Daryl.